Okay. What was it like to travel with 3 children?
Well, it was difficult, but it was also adventurous and very exciting. And it was gradual. Like the first time we did it, we hitchhiked from New Orleans to San Francisco, and then we only had the one child. And in one sense, it was very beautiful. They'd let us out in the middle of the desert. That's as far as that ride went. And there we'd be sitting in the middle of the night, in the middle of the desert, sitting on a suitcase, holding this baby. And my husband would be dancing around in front of me saying, "Isn't it beautiful? Isn't it gorgeous?" And it was. The stars were out like diamonds in the sky, hundreds and thousands of stars you could see in the middle of the desert. But at the same time, I'm sitting on the suitcase, and my baby has diaper rash, and I'm wondering when I'm going to get to the next place where I can really give him a bath and change that diaper. But it was very beautiful. It was an easy experience. And then the second time we hitchhiked, there were 2 children, and it wasn't that much more difficult hitchhiking across the country to New York. And then the third time that we hitched, we got a ride with a friend to Mexico City. And then the car broke down at the border. We had broken down all the way, but we got tired of it. My husband had never driven before, and this girl pulls up on a Friday afternoon in New York and says, "Okay, you drive." And he never drove before, and he had to drive through all this traffic and city traffic. He'd never driven before. So every day we'd wake up and we'd be in a garage because he didn't know how to drive. Things were always breaking down, the universal, the transmission, this, that. So we ended up leaving the car at the border. And then we took the third-class bus. And the third-class bus is full of one of those real old rickety buses like you see in the movies. And it's full of Indians and cows and pigs and chickens and bags of garlic-smelling things. And so we didn't know it, but there was a hurricane just before we started this trip. And all the bridges were washed out. So here we'd all of a sudden the bus would stop at this cliff, and we had all this luggage, but little boys would show up and they would carry safari-style luggage down to the riverbed. Just before we got to the riverbed, there was this mud plank, and people were sitting on it and sliding down into the riverbed, but I wasn't going to do that. Holding this baby, I was scared to sit down and slide down. This little old Indian lady came up, and she took the baby from me. She slid down, and then men on each side held my hands while I, like a queen, walked down the flank. But that's the way it was all the way to Mexico City. One time we had to get out and cross over rocks. Another time we had to get out and get on this boat, and then the bus went on the boat, and they had this rope stretched across the river, and we all pulled on the rope, and that's how we got the boat across. Finally, we landed up in Monterey. We had to wait there for a new bus, and we all laid down on the sidewalk with the Indians, and just waited till a new bus came. And then we finally made it to Mexico City. So even though it was hard in one sense, it was adventurous and exciting. And the same with our trip to San Francisco. Next time we hitchhiked to San Francisco, no, we were going to Florida. That's where we were the third time. Now the kids were teenagers, and they were bigger. And we were going through Pensacola, and we were trying to hitchhike, and it was Friday night. And they got us. They arrested us for contributing to the delinquency of minors and for vagrancy. In those days, we didn't have any money, vagrancy rule. So off we went to the jail for the weekend, and they bothered the kids and asked them, "Did we abuse them?" The kids said, "No, they loved us, and we were on our way to Florida." And all our stories coincided, so we were fortunate enough so the judge got mad. He said, "You take these people back out on the highway where you found them." And they took us back out on the highway right by a watermelon patch, because having gone to the court, we missed our breakfast. So we're sitting around eating the watermelon, feeling pretty good. And here comes this Good Humor truck. And the Good Humor truck, you know, they're just a small truck with a square back. We thought he was just going to give us ice cream, but he says, "Get in." And we managed to fit behind the seat of the Good Humor truck, and in the space next to it where a passenger seat would be, and all 5 of us, and they were teenage boys, and our suit and our sea bags that we were allowed to have. And he took us to 150 miles that way. And then we got to Fort Walton, and we were waiting there, and this lady saw us in the morning, and then she saw us at noon. And she came along and said, "Okay, you've been waiting long enough, I'm going to give you bus tickets." And so life was always very exciting. And somehow we managed to get to Miami, and they were having that Cuban refugee thing, and they were taking care of all these Cuban refugees, and they were so glad to see some Americans that they could take care of. So they gave us a very nice apartment and $20 a day and helped us find jobs. So it was like very adventuresome traveling, hitchhiking, because somehow you put yourself in the hands of God, and He takes care of you just like He takes care of the lilies in the field.
Was it a dangerous proposition, hitchhiking at that time?
No, in those days it wasn't dangerous at all. People were much nicer, and they wanted to give you a ride. And we were a family. What could they do to us? We didn't have anything.
So what was the purpose of all this traveling? You seem to be doing a lot of traveling at that period of time. What was the purpose?
Well, that's how we got where we wanted to go. Like the first time we were in New Orleans and we wanted to go to San Francisco. My husband was having a hard time finding. He was a sailor. He felt he should find some kind of sea work, and he wasn't doing well in New Orleans, so we went to California to try. First we tried San Diego and the tuna fishing, and that didn't do well, so then we went up to San Francisco and decided to try and work with the fishing boats there. And then this other time, we were on our way to Mexico City to go to Mexico City College, and we were meaning well going in the car, but we got hung up there, you know, and in the border, so we had to hitchhike. Then coming back, we were broke coming back, so we had to hitchhike back. We always stayed wherever it was until we were desperately broke. It always seemed easier on the road, people giving you rides and feeding you.
So who was the main provider in the family?
Well, I would say it was pretty 50-50. We sort of took turns doing it. It was easier for me to get work right away as a waitress. And I would get a job. We'd get to a new place, I'd get a job as a waitress, and pretty soon they could come in and eat, and then by the time the night came, I had enough tips to rent us a room. So I was like the immediate wage earner. And then when we got settled somewhere, my husband always got into something like boat building, or when we had the kids. The first kid, he was in the Navy. The second kid, he worked for the sugar factory in San Francisco. And the third kid, he quit. Like most of the time, he liked to paint and build boats or do artwork. But when things got down to the nitty-gritty and I couldn't work, he would go and work in the sugar factory. And then when we had the third kid, he went and worked carrying cement blocks, because they were doing a lot of building down in the Florida Keys. I had one kid born in New York, one in San Francisco, and one in Key West. I think because he was in the Navy during the war, he had the habit of wanting to move on. When things got tough, we just moved on. And I liked it. I was full of adventure. To me, it was all wonderful, adventurous, and exciting.
So you were looking for adventure at the time. It fitted in with your lifestyle.
I guess I would have done whatever he wanted to do. I was very taken with him. He was like turning on a whole new world to me, new world of sensuality and music and art, and it was like paradise, you know. And I was experiencing people's experiences. So to me, he was God. To me, he was the Jesus Christ that I knew as a kid, you know. And traveling around the way we did, we were pretty thin, so he'd even look like Jesus Christ laying there pretty emaciated.
Your lifestyle was very unusual for the time. How did society look upon you, your family, and the beat movement as a whole?
Yeah. Well, we kind of didn't have much to do. At first, the family didn't like that they had to pay for us, because every once in a while we'd write and ask them for money, and they said, we're not going to support you while you go traveling around the country, you know. And so they got kind of upset about it. But then at one point, my husband was arrested for marijuana, and my family put up the house so to get him out of jail. And when we went down to Florida to live, so from then on, I would say from 1952 to maybe 64 or 62, for 10 years. Actually, it was a 15-year period. We weren't in touch with our families. Our families, we just were a unit, and we were the crones. And I used to tell them that the ethics I taught them was, we don't do this, we don't do that, because we're crones, and crones have respect. for other people. They have respect for other people's things, you know. And so the society, we weren't even involved in society that much, but my husband did have gifts. He was a great artist, and he was very good at picture frame making and boat building, and so he was appreciated in that sense for his gifts and his abilities, you know. And I guess I was respected too because I was so adaptable and a good homemaker. You know.
But in society at that time, there wasn't many people like you with the family moving around all the time on adventures. It seemed to me the 40s and 50s was a period of time of tract housing and the nuclear family.
Yeah.
So where was your role within the whole of this society? It seems to be, to me, dramatic opposites.
Yeah. Well, we were like the traveling grapevine. We knew all the hippie people in Woodstock and the hippie people in the Village, and we knew the hippie people in New Orleans and the hippie people in Mexico City and the hippie people in San Francisco. So we were like a family within a family. We were traveling around, but there was always, when we get there, this other family. But it wouldn't be a family, it would be mostly fellas. In New Orleans, there was one fellow, a trumpet player, and he had a wife and a baby. And in San Francisco, we met this couple, and they had a couple of kids. But usually, it was just a group of men, either artists or a group of musicians. And we went around and we'd tell stories from one place to another. And we were always, so we weren't involved in the main stream of society. We were involved in this small hippie environment.
So what was the woman's position within this beat movement?
Well, she didn't have much of a position. I was respected and protected because I had a husband, you know. But they would be quick to lose that respect. Like, for example, one time when my husband got arrested, right away the saxophone player says, "Oh, you know," he didn't think, "Oh, we'll get him out." You know, his thought was, "Oh, I'll take care of you. You can come and live with me." You know? So in that sense, they were quick, you know, to latch on to you as a woman. But while my husband was with me, they were very respectful of that. But you didn't have much of an opinion. You weren't allowed to state much of an opinion. They had wonderful ideals. But like so many people with ideals, it's hard to live up to your ideals. We're just human beings. And ideals are something gods have. And so people don't usually live up to their ideals. And they didn't. And I was very shocked at that because the first 10 years I was so excited about the wonderful new life, and I thought everybody was perfect and it was all wonderful. But I didn't have much to say because I hadn't done anything yet. I was still absorbing their culture, this beat culture, and the culture of the bohemian, the artist, and the writer, and the musician. But finally, at one point, I started to have my own ideas. And I remember one time the men were talking and they were getting pretty excited, and I said, "Oh no, it's blah, blah, blah." And they looked at me and they said, "Be quiet, you were talking." And that was probably one of my first traumatic shocks, that I wasn't considered an equal, you know. And then up in Woodstock, we were all gathered together. We all lived together, a bunch of artists. There was Zoot Sims, the musician, and Bob Kaufman, the poet, and Isabel Cooley, she played Anna Lou Coster, and we all hung out up in this farm in Woodstock. We had the Woodstock Frame Company then, and my husband was going to the Art Students League, and most of these people were going to the Art Students League. And my job was, I had cooked the food. This other girl who was an artist, and she owned the farm, she bought the food, and it was wonderful. We'd go to this Italian gourmet place, and there was no limit to what we could buy, and so I had a wonderful time cooking the food. Sometimes I'd get upset because they all go off to the Art Students League, and I'd be stuck there with the kids and all these dirty dishes. But what I would do, they had a public address system that went through the hills, and I would turn up the public address system and run through the hills, the kids following me to Cacciatorian and Sibelius, and we'd run through the hills to the top of the hill, and then we'd roll down this grassy hill. And by the time I did all that, I felt okay, and I'd come back in the house and clean up the dishes, and everything would be all right.
Were you writing by that time?
I've always been writing. I've been writing since high school. I used to write little character sketches about people, you know. But I started writing seriously in San Francisco when I was pregnant, and I couldn't work anymore. I began to write the story of our hitchhiking and in different places, and my first experiences with marijuana and stuff like that.
So was your writing considered serious amongst the Beat Generation, or was it put to the one side and sort of?
Yeah, it was put to one side. I wasn't. There was one person in Florida, this artist, and he loved me to read what I was writing. And he said, "That's so good, I can't wait to hear the next thing." But he was the only one that showed too much appreciation at the beginning. Everybody was more impressed with my husband, who was a very good artist and very wise, and I was more like just his wife, you know. But there came a time when we were living in Laguna Beach, and I was reading my poetry, and this man heard me, and he just thought it was the most wonderful thing, you know. And that was the first time that I felt like I was being discovered. But then I brought him home and he saw my husband's paintings, and that was the end of that. Instead, he got all involved with my husband and his paintings, and one day we went to his house and he had these 4 by 8 feet paintings all over his house. I felt sorry for his wife. They were all over the walls in his house. But I didn't mind. See, I was so busy with the kids and doing all that, you know, and that I wasn't too worried about not being recognized as a poet. But when I came to California and I joined the Temple of Man, most of they seemed like a very strong little clique that they had, and it was very hard for a woman to be heard. And I noticed that too. But you know, when you're a woman, nowadays maybe women fight more, but I really wasn't. I was satisfied with what I was doing, and even today, I'm not too anxious to go public and push my poetry. I'll write it, but to get it together and actually go out and publish it, you know, look for somebody to publish it. It's almost as if you need somebody else to do that for you, you know, as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, I'm going to go back a bit again. The Beat Generation was seen as a time when social attitudes and barriers were broken down, at least challenged, i.e. drugs and sex. But what I like to know is what the effect did it have upon women within the Beat Generation movement and upon yourself personally?
Well, I think that all the things that they were against, like Timothy Leary, all those, he said to drop out, you know, but he just wanted you to drop out of the things that were useless, you know, that weren't really sincere. And I think that we all wanted a simpler life with less government and less telling us what to do. We all wanted a freer life, and we wanted to live in the now moment. I noticed that. But women, I think, were less likely to want to live in the now moment because they had the children, and they always have this security thing that they have to take care of the children. So they're always looking for a little more security, while the men do like living in the now moment. And I think that it's a beautiful thing to do, to live in the now moment. But it isn't very practical because our society isn't geared for that. But they were sincere. They meant well. They wanted the freedom. They wanted to treat women like each other, you know, like they themselves, and they wanted to give women the freedom. That was their ideal, but they never actually did it because they were too busy impressing each other to worry about, to let the women in.
So in a sense, was an ego trip for the men?
Yeah, I think so. Like, I think they were constantly trying to impress each other, and they played tricks on each other, you know, and they took advantage of each other's weaknesses, you know, and that was all kind of shocking because I feel we were more involved with taking care of the kids and cooking and taking care of the home just in the old-fashioned way, you know, and the few women that did rebel, I think, were not very happy. They were like, the happy women in the Beat Generation were the ones that were taking care of the home, the ones that were being active and trying to get the attention. Now for me, I didn't have as much difficulty as most other people because my husband he really tried to have me share his life. And like, we had a very schizophrenic life. First we'd have the life where there were just the two of us and the kids, and we'd do the boat building and the picture frame making and we'd be together, especially hitchhiking. We spent a lot of time with just the 5 of us, the Crones. And then, like boat building, we built this boat one time, and we'd start off sailing in the boat. We landed in Key West, we're walking down the street, and there's this group of people that smoke grass, and they recognized my husband, and they'd say, come on over here, it's all happening over here. And then all of a sudden, the family life was cut off, and we'd be off into the hip life, you know. And at that time, I would get a job in a jazz club as a waitress, and he'd be off with those guys doing Lord knows what. So it was kind of a schizophrenic way of life we had. When there was just the 2 of us, it was nice. But as soon as the hip world showed up, then it was the men were one thing and the women were the other. In fact, the men used to sit, we lived in a community, and the men would sit around all night and talk, and the women would go to bed, and they'd each be waiting in their beds for the men to come, while the men were out there talking and impressing each other. And I'd get, when I turn on with them, usually most of the time it was mostly men. And I would turn on, and that whatever they were doing or talking about seemed like they were just trying to get jockey in position to be the boss and direct everybody. And I just couldn't see any sense of what they were doing, and I'd listen to the jazz. And I got very turned on to the music. I felt kind of isolated, but I got very turned on to the music. And I'd hear the music would just take me out of myself, and I'd do a lot of astral. And I thought that's what getting high really meant, you know, to leave your body and fly out there and experience astral experiences. But to a lot of people, getting high meant getting some strength and power to either do artwork or music or to manage each other. And I noticed that the musicians, I began to glorify the musicians and think they were gods. And their music was so beautiful, I thought they should be perfect, but they wouldn't be perfect. And then there was a brief time between husbands when I had the experience of being a teenager, that is, a person on their own. And I would fall in love with some musician, and he would say all these wonderful romantic things. And as soon as I went to bed with him, he'd say, that would be it. And I'd say, where do you want me to drop you off? And it would be so shocking. And I wondered, because I had my husband since I'm 13, and I wondered, how did these young teenagers, at least I was 40 years old when this was going on, how did these young teenagers do it? You know, these men using them and using them. But somehow life just rolls on like a train, and you just take what comes.
So what you're saying is that a lot of women were exploited by the Beat Generation, were used?
Well, I don't think any more than by the hetero. I think the Beat Generation wasn't that different sexually than the hetero. You know, like there's the group of heterosexuals that actually get married and are sincere and take care of their wives and their family. And then there's the group of heteros that go out and looking for women, you know, even though they have that family. And then there's the Beat Generation. They just, most of them didn't have that responsibility. They just couldn't conceive of, you know, taking care of a family. If they did have a girlfriend, the girlfriend had a child, the girlfriend took care of that. I didn't see any sign, especially when we lived up in North Beach, of anybody caring about anybody else but themselves and what they got, what they wanted, you know.
So,
in fact, they all were like that. Bill Burroughs, Jack Kerouac, Allen Ginsberg and his gang, you know, they were all out to get high and to get what they wanted, you know. Nobody felt any responsibility towards each other. And in the later days, like in the late 50s and 60s, they were even losing their ethics. In the early days, we had ethics. Well, that you didn't rat on anybody, you didn't do this, you know. And but in the later days, I don't even think they lost their ethics. You know.
So, how were the children brought up in this period of time? What was the children's life like?
Well, the women were, I think, the children were very beautiful, and the women were very beautiful, but like most of the children were very beautiful. But some of the children were exposed to sex, and they were kind of warped, you know. Like a couple of times we were supposed to babysit somebody's kid, and the kid would do all kinds of sexy things, you know. And even one of them went in the bathroom and found some pills and was shoving the pills down. So it depended, I think, on who it was, just like anything, you know, in the beat world, when it came down to the families. And I was always going towards the families that were on a spiritual experience, and I always liked that kind of thing. And my husband was always going towards the single men that were writers and musicians. So when I left him, I finally did all the things he said were uncool. Like I smoked cool cigarettes. I went to the different religious things that I wanted to go to before, you know. I guess the biggest things they put down were popular things of society and religion. They loved to say that religion was the opium, you know, of the people, and that they kept the people down through religion, you know. And then they were always thinking they were being persecuted, you know, too. They sat around and spent a lot of time being persecuted by the government, you know, because what they were doing was illegal, you know. And so the government was always after them. They were paranoid.
Was that paranoia, or was it actually true that the government was trying to clamp down on the Beat Generation?
Well, it's true they were doing something against the law, and the police were always there, you know. But at the same time, if you didn't think about them, you know, and be obvious in in what you were doing, and usually people didn't get arrested unless they started selling. When they started selling is when they got arrested, when they got in trouble, you know. Because all those years, we never got in trouble again. In the very early days in New Orleans, it was hard. But we never got in trouble again after that, because I think it got more relaxed. There was so much of it being done, they couldn't keep up with it. So they didn't bother the little man, they just went after the sellers, you know.
Okay, I'm going to cut it there for a break, okay?
Things on?
Yeah, it's on. What was life like in the 40s and 50s, so like daily life for the average person in society?
Well, in the 40s and 50s, everyone was geared to hard work because of the World War II. Everybody that stayed at home was accustomed to hard work, and they all worked very hard and had homes, and everyone had a job. Like my Uncle Ed, who was a writer, he never worked, but as soon as the war broke out, he went to work, and he worked every single day for Sperry Gyroscope. And as soon as the war was over, he quit work and went back up in the attic and started writing again. But I think people had the habit of making money. Everybody was into making money. And even after the war was over, they continued to do that. But then came home all these soldiers and sailors, and they were not in the habit of going to work every day. They had their travels and their excitement, and all of a sudden life seemed dull to them. So they didn't want to go get a job in Macy's. I remember my husband, when he got out, I had worked as a waitress for Schrapp's all during that time, and when he got living with my parents, and when he got out, I had saved quite a bit of money, and we went off to Manhattan, and we had wonderful times every night. And but my parents didn't like that. And soon we spent all our money, and he had to go to work. I had to go back to Schrapp's. He had to go back to Macy's, and he didn't like that. He didn't like going to work every day. But it was expected. Everybody expected people to do that, and have nice family homes and holidays. And but the whole beat thing, I think, was accelerated. There was always a group of bohemians, you know, that did their art and their painting and didn't go to work every day. But then after World War II, there were all these veterans that didn't want to do that either, and a lot of them went back to school, a lot of them got jobs, but there was this whole group that didn't want to do that, and my husband was one of those. And it's a wonderful thing not to have to go to work every day. That's why I liked everything he wanted to do. At first he didn't want me to follow him around. He said, "You won't like it, you know, I'm never going to stay in the same place," because being in the Navy, they never were in the same place. But I liked it. I thought it was exciting and adventurous, and I've never had any fear, like where's the next meal coming from or anything like that. But my parents and all, and most of the people were used to having a stability, a home and security and a job, and went to church and had parties. But
So were the people expected to settle down and find a house and
yeah, sure,
family?
they were all expected to settle down. But the thing is, there wasn't really that much room for them to settle down. And they used to complain, I was in the war and I did all this and did all that. And now everybody's making money except me, you know. And they didn't want to start at the bottom and get a menial job and work their way up. You know, they wanted to be on top right away. I don't know what they wanted, but they weren't used to thinking for themselves. They were used to, with the regiment, being taken care of by the Army or the Navy, and it was very hard for them, I think. And even after the Vietnam War, we have even accelerated compared to the veterans after World War II. They're even more, you know, in the Korean War, I guess that's where the real hippies came from, the Korean War, was it? I don't know, I was living down in Yucatan then with the Mayan Indians.
So was there good job prospects after the war?
Well, I don't think there were the prospects that people dreamed of, you know. There's always menial labor. You can look in the advertising section of the newspaper, and there's always work, you know. And it's a matter of wanting to do it, and I don't think they wanted to do it. It isn't so much that there wasn't the work. They didn't want to do that particular kind of work. They didn't feel trained, and they didn't feel that they knew how to do anything, you know. So they had to work in factories or menial jobs in hot dogs, hamburger stands, or for some reason they just weren't able to do that.
What's the average sort of like social life for the people on the street? For you know, in society, what's sort of like their distractions and entertainment?
Yeah, well, they went to nightclubs and to movies, and they had a lot of parties at home, and they, you know, it depended on what level they were. But my folks, they depended on a lot of home parties and celebrations and birthdays.
So it's very family oriented.
Uh-huh.
And after the war, was it the war which the consumerism came about, where people?
Yeah, cynicism. What'd you say?
Consumerism, where people are sort of like buying material
Yeah.
more.
Yeah, because there were more things to buy, you know, more things came on the market. And people, when the veterans who came back, they didn't have the money to buy that stuff. They didn't have the skills to get good jobs, you know. So they started complaining about how they were not taken care of properly after they went and fought for their country. And so a lot of the beat people were these people that never adjusted to society, never would work at a job, you know. And then a lot of them lived on, I was called welfare, I guess then, you know, not SSI. Nowadays they're living on SSI. But they were on veterans' pensions and all kinds of, you know, sick things from the war.
So do you think the Beat Generation was, you mentioned that there's always a Bohemian society, a collection of people in each society, but do you feel that the Beat Generation sort of like took that forward and introduced it more to the working classes maybe, and more?
Well, I guess some more of the working class found it, because they certainly are supporting the music today, aren't they? So they found it more exciting, the working class. But I would say the working class stayed the working class. It's just were more of these people that were in the services that came out of the working class that didn't feel like they could fit back into the working class. They had seen too much in the war, you know. Their consciousnesses were much more expanded than the people that they left behind. So they were dissatisfied with the way things were, but yet they didn't know the way things should be. That's why I wrote that poem, because most of them were complaining, and that's why I wrote that poem to Allen Ginsberg, "Get hip, boy, blow us some joy. Quit taking up your precious space, singing of your old man's disgrace. Get hip, boy, blow us some joy. We all know exactly what we ain't. if you can't tell us what to do, then paint, get hip, boy, blow us some joy. And that was my big complaint about the hip movement, that they weren't, and they just seemed to get all involved in feeling sorry for themselves. They sat around feeling sorry for themselves, that everybody was taking advantage of them. They had been taken advantage of, and they couldn't get anywhere. And instead of doing something about it, you know, they just sat around and complained. A lot of their poetry, beautiful words, but it's all a big complaint. Even my poem, Get Hip Boy, Blow Us Some Joy, is a complaint against Allen Ginsberg.
There's a contradiction in a sense.
Yeah.
So when did you first hear the term Beat Generation?
Well, we were living there. We always thought we were bohemians, you know, and we were living down in the Florida Keys, actually in Sarasota, Florida, and we were building a sailboat, and we were working for the museum, Sarasota Museum of Art, and painting, you know, and people started calling us boatniks, you know. Beatniks. They were saying what we were beatniks because we lived very simply. We lived in a Quonset hut out at the airport that was near the museum. We didn't live like other people. We never lived like other people. We always lived very simply, and people marveled at us. Like a director of the museum would come over and say, "I don't know how you do it," you know, like, and so. What are we talking about? I forgot what we're talking about.
Where did you first hear?
Oh yeah, so they started calling us beatniks because we lived so simply and could get by with so little, you know. Mm-hmm. And we were building a boat at the time, so I said, no, we're boatniks, you know, boatniks. So when we finished the boat, we sailed in it, and we got to Key West, and somebody wanted to buy it, so we bought it and we went to Mexico. And when we were in Mexico, that's when I really knew about the beatniks, you know, started knowing about beatniks. And I said, let's go to San Francisco and see who these beatniks are, you know, because I wanted to be a poet, you know, and I was very impressed with Bill Burroughs, you know, and Jack Kerouac. And I was writing a novel, The Evolution of a Female in the 20th Century. That was the original title of my novel. And I was writing this because I had changed from being a middle-class Catholic square. Now I was this far-out artist, hip person that knew everything. And even I felt I considered myself a little above even the hippies. See, I considered myself one step above them. That I sort of was. They were all caught in the act while I was still in the theater watching them. You know. And so I felt superior because they never wanted to hear what I had to say, but I knew what they wanted to say, and I knew what I thought. So I had double wisdom. Well, they only had their simple little, they called us squares, but they were living in their little square world at the same time, you see, with their little thing. And what I was learning was to take the best from both worlds, from my middle class thing and from the hippie thing, take the best of both and go on from there. And that's what I learned.
Okay, another question I wanted to ask you was about different ethnic groups. Were they involved within the Beat Generation? What's the attitude towards them?
Well, at first I never noticed any difference because we were all very involved with the jazz music, and when we lived in Mexico City with the Afro-Cubans, and it was all wonderful, and everybody seemed to be on an equal footing. But then when I got to North Beach and the black musicians were starting to make it with the white girls, I realized that the white men didn't like it. You know, they didn't like it, and they called them the usual names and stuff, and I was shocked at that, because I always thought that we were all equal. Anyway, how can you tell who's black? Where does black begin? Where does brown begin? In Mexico City, I lived with this Afro-Cuban bass player when I was between the two husbands, and even the Mexicans would look at us and say, "Oh, Gene, how can you like him? He's so dark," you know. And I think, well, gee, you know, he's not much darker than you are. Where does dark begin, you know? So I never had that hang-up, and I was very shocked when I saw that the hippies really didn't like the black men making it with the white women. Otherwise, everybody was on the same footing. But I guess eventually they didn't trust each other. But not being one of those men, you know, I don't really know. I only know that they played on each other's weaknesses. Do men do that anyway, in all walks of life?
I think so, yeah. Okay, I'm going to cut there.
I really felt bad about that. I was really surprised. I didn't expect it. I thought he was a lot healthier than that. He always seemed healthy, you know. And he's the same age as I am. So it was kind of shocking. And even though I used to criticize him and I wrote that poem, Get Hip, Boy, Blow Us Some Joy, Quit Taking Up This Precious Space, Singing of Your Old Man's Disgrace, Get Hip, Boy, Blow Us Some Joy. I'm sick and tired of your complaint. We all know exactly what we ain't. If you can't tell us what to do, then thanks. Get hip, boy. Blow us some joy. Yeah, and he didn't like it.
So do you feel the same way about him now? Or has your views changed about Alan?
Well, I read Howl again, and it kind of was true, you know. But, and he was trying to get people to do something about it, I guess. And at that time, it just seemed like a bunch of complaints, because I just come back from Mexico and I wanted everybody to be joyous and feel good, you know, and not be so down and depressed all the time. He always seemed, but then I saw it on TV. They had a nice collage of different ages, you know, and he looked great up in North Beach doing Howl, and he looked great doing the Buddhist chant, you know, because we spent that time at UCLA and sitting in a circle. It was just so beautiful. And then I saw him in the suit. The latest pictures, he looked really good. They had him in a nice suit and tie, you know, and his hair was starting to go and he was trim, you know. And of course, the last time I saw him personally, his father had just died and he had a lot of hair and it was all gray, and he had his father's gray suit on, and he was kind of depressing looking. But then later on, when he went back to New York, he got more trim, what I call spiffy trim.
Do you feel he played an important part within the Beat
Oh,
generation?
yeah, he was very important to me. It was a big turn on to me because he made me realize if I was telling him to blow some joy, that I should blow some joy. You know, and then I always tried to put joy in my writing and turn on, you know, and not bring people down. You know, so I felt like I was his evolution, you know. And he was very important to me, probably the most important, more than Bill Burroughs or Jack Kerouac, you know.
And why would that be? Why would Alan be in front of Jack Kerouac?
Well, I knew him better. You know, even though we didn't have a personal relationship, I saw him many times, followed his life, you know, and our paths crossed so many times, you know, and he's my age. Well, the other, Bill Burroughs is at least 10 years older than me, and so that was a whole other trip. He was a junkie, you know. And Jack Kerouac, it was very fleeting, you know. He was important to me, his writing. Both, they were all important to me, those three, the writing, you know. It helped me become more aware. Bill Burroughs helped me become aware. Jack Kerouac gave me the rhythm of being on the road and writing and letting it all come out, you know, without editing it and making it stiff, you know. And Allen Ginsberg made me realize that I should blow some joy. And there was enough people telling down stuff, you know, and I should blow some joy. So I do, and I'm surprised that Bill Burroughs outlasted him.
I think we're all surprised that he's the one
Yeah.
who's lost.
But see, I think sometimes that junk is a preservative, because I notice all these people, it wasn't until they try to quit that they died, you know? And I feel that way about myself. While I was doing speed, like I was getting the circulation going and I was busy and active, you know, doing things. And then as soon as I stopped and laid down, so to speak, going back to school and studying, and I think then your system gets kind of rusty, you know, and that's why I got all these joints and rusts and stuff, stiffness, you know. But of course it's age too. But my doctor, I'm always complaining, and he says, well, you're in your second childhood, you know, and you're like a little kid. What more do you want, you know? So your body's stiff, you know.
So we were talking earlier on about AIDS and like the disease of the 90s,
Yeah.
80s and 90s, but you were mentioning about other...
Yeah, well, he died, Allen Ginsberg, of cancer of the liver, and a lot of us from those days have hepatitis C, you know, and there were a lot of other things. We didn't have AIDS, but we had gonorrhea, and we had syphilis and hepatitis C, and then later on in the 70s, the herpes, you know, God knows what else, you know, that people caught from each other.
Was this because all the loving?
Huh?
Was this because
Yeah,
all
I think
the
between the free sex and the hypes, the using of the hypodermic needle, we just pass it around, you know. Everybody used the same needle. You know, sometimes you get somebody's blood and then you get a terrible chill, you know. That only happened to me twice. And the first time it happened, Peter didn't know what it was. Peter, he didn't know what it was, and he put me in the bathtub with a lot of hot water, you know. But it's a pretty dangerous thing to do, you know. People don't think that, you know. They just think of getting high, and once they get high, they're chasing that elusive high that they'll never get again, you know. It's like being a virgin.
I can't remember that.
Huh?
I can't remember that.
No. Well, to me, I'm a virgin. I feel like a virgin because there's something about, like, if you stop doing all the things, you know, that keep you from being, then you're a virgin again, you know. And you get pure, you know, you stop, I always wanted to be a nun, so now it's none of this and none of that and none of the other thing. And I really felt like a virgin after I tied my tubes, and I had those 17 years of decadence. Then I untied my tubes, and ever since I felt like a virgin, you know, even having sex, because I was monogamous, you know. I've been monogamous ever since, and I think that's important. You know, it's pretty virginal. And anyway, right now I feel like a virgin, ready to meet my maker.
So it's like come around in full circle.
Yeah, that same innocence, and you know, it's almost as if those 17 years down, as if I'm telling about somebody else. You know, it really is. It's a whole other world. And actually, it was somebody else. It was the person that my husband wanted me to be. You know, and so he was forming me, and he did admit it, that he had consciously did that, and that the only goof he did was that he forgot he could goof. You know. And I feel that's what happened to Marilyn Monroe. Marilyn Monroe I always affiliated with. To me, she's a very beautiful person, simple like me. But then the men took her and made her what they wanted her to be. And she could never adapt to it, you know, because that isn't what she wanted to be. And it was hard for her to, she didn't have, I don't know, God or whatever I had that helped me go back and find myself. She didn't have that. I had a good childhood, you know, the basic roots of being brought up by God. And I think that's what happened. But I know that she was a beautiful person. She was just rearranged by men. They might take a person and make them the way they want it to be, you know. And it's kind of confusing because each person is an individual. And if you can't be yourself, then you get nutty, you know.
Okay. Very good. Okay, great.
Is that good? You
Yeah,
like
there's
it?
some interesting bits
Have your
there.
little opening, I think your opening shot. So.
You know, and all these things in my life happen. And then, you know, I never had to want anything. Maybe I rhyme. I first met Bill Burroughs in 1952. My husband Peter and I and 3 kids were down in Mexico City studying on the GI Bill. Bill was our pot connection. He would greet us at his dank and musty basement apartment, and he'd say, "Well, I hope you're not planning to stay long. You heads," he would whine, "are too sociable. Why can't you just take your stash and split?" But he didn't really mean it. He liked us and would invite some to his inner sanctum, the bathroom. But I would never go. Only men went. I would amuse myself by reading what Bill had in his typewriter. He was working on his novel, Junkie. His psychological observations were so acute I thought he was the oldest, wisest man I'd ever met. I was 25, he was 35. We all respected Bill, sardonic as he was and usually complaining about something. He always felt good to be near. One day, Widmo, a San Francisco bass player, came down and told us how people were taking peyote, an Indian cactus, and he wanted to try and quit junk behind it. So off we all went to the Zocalo, to the Merced Market, and we found Jesus Trinidad sitting in front of his herb stand. It was more like a cave covered with herbs and frogs and lizards and dried mushrooms dangling all around. Well, I can get peyote for you, the curandero told us, but come back in a week. When we returned, he led us, single file, into the back streets, and we arrived at a brownstone building. But once inside, we realized we were in an elegant palace, all gold and marble. And he took us into this large bathroom, and there, piled to the ceiling, were these beautiful, fresh green peyote buttons. He said that he made them. He dried them, and people made tea to calm their nerves. He had us cut out the cotton tufts and slice off the top and cut the button into small pieces, which he made us chew and eat. It was a bitter brew, but if we threw it up, he made us wash it off and eat it again. And he wouldn't let us leave until we all thumped our chests and said we were Indians. Now, I don't remember B.B. Philip thumping his chest. But once outside, the world was so beautiful, sparkling, glittering and gleaming and green. Everything was so green. But Bill Burroughs couldn't get high. He loved guns, and he was carrying a gun around in his briefcase, and it kept getting heavier and heavier, and he kept whining, I've got to get rid of this gun. So we all had to go back to his apartment, and he got rid of his gun, and he started to get high. And then we rode to Cuernavaca, where we ran up and down the mountain as if we were Indians. It was nothing to run up and down those mountains. And then we met a bunch of Indians who were celebrating, and we joined their native Indian dance and became one with them. Now, Bill Burroughs just had a show recently at the Los Angeles Modern Museum of Art, and I went to see it, and this is the excerpts of his titles and different things he said. Living in a sepia haze with William Burroughs on guns. That man holding the gun has a big hole in his head. That gun has blood in its hole. On wood-splintered sculpture. Saw shoulder, wood spirits, door, shoot the sheriff. Hypnotic dream machine, flashing, revolving lights to Moroccan French music. Quotes, an artist does not render nature. He sees what others do not see. The ambiguous smile of a temptress. 'Tain't no sin to dance around your bones. Then he had a beautiful sculpture called Nod. Kansas City, Jack, Gillespie, women, their bitter and evil faces. Videos, reach, power by surrender. Survival is the name of the game. Thanksgiving. Thanks for the American dream to vulgarize nature. Thanks for the betrayal of human dreams. Thanks for the warm blanket of snooze. Ixtabentun poet, she who spits out precious stones. On death. Death needs time for what it kills to grow it. Requiem. Well, Geisen, are we gonna stand still for this shit? Man the fucking pumps, close those airlocks, close those word locks. Silence. This is Jack Kerouac. Hanging out with Bill Burroughs was enlightening and very interesting, but not much fun until Jack came swinging into town in his black leather jacket and his curly black hair. He was to me a knight in shining armor compared to Phoebe, who was all dark. He was lively, enthusiastic, and we liked each other immediately. We usually walked together, though it felt like we danced together down the street. When we went out with the crowd, he would have breakfast in this Chinese restaurant, and Jack would try to get me to shortchange the cashier when we left. "You have such an honest face," he would say. "You could get away with it." "Oh, Jack, I wouldn't do that." "It's okay," he would say. "It's not wrong. It's the craftsmanship and getting away with it." But I never would, and he would pretend to be disappointed in me. But I knew it was a game to see if I could succumb. Now, 4 times howling with Allen Ginsberg. We had just returned from Mexico to North Beach. We went to the mission to hear this young poet, quite the rage. There he was, all young and black, hairy, jeans and black leather jacket. From a high stool, he read his new poem, Howl. He was complaining about everything, politics, religion, etc., etc., etc. I was horrified. We just returned from a country where life was a struggle. Here in America, you can't even starve. So I wrote to him, "Get here, boy. Blow us some joy. Quit taking up this precious space, singing of your old man's disgrace. Get here, boy. Blow us some joy. I'm sick and tired of your complaint. We all know exactly what we ain't. If you can't tell us what to do, then paint. Get here, boy. Blow us some joy." Next time I saw Bill, he didn't like that poem very much. But the next time I saw Allen Ginsberg, it was at USC. We went to hear him read. The place was filled, so they let us sit on the stage. And when he came out, as he passed, he looked at me and exclaimed, "It's not fair! It's not fair!" I didn't even think he'd ever remembered me. Well, he did his thing. He read his howl, and when he was through, he announced to the young, mostly male crowd, "If anyone wants to make with me, just see me backstage." The 3rd time I saw Allen, I was a student at UCLA, and I heard this Buddhist music and chant on Bruin Walk. Complete with their shrine set up, the Buddhists were chanting in their yellow robes. I went and joined them, and standing next to this large, clean-shaven man in a business suit, and as I chanted along with him, I realized it was Allen Ginsberg, and was happy that he'd moved up a peg and found God. The 4th time I saw Allen, his father had passed, and he was on the UCLA stage in a crusty old suit of his father's, speaking of love for his father, full gray beard, now in a crusty gray suit. Thank you. That's full of poems written to the Master. I've never read my sacred poems except with satsangis, and most of the people here are disciples of my Master. But this is the first time because Frankie encouraged me to do it. So I'm going to do it, and I'm not without proselytizing. Huh? No, I became a teacher. Yeah, I went back to UCLA and got my degree in English literature and creative writing, and then I tried to teach junior high school. So is everybody ready? Can you hear me? Should I speak? All right. Well, I've just heard the other day on in television this song, and it said, everyone is wondering where they came from, and everyone is wondering where they're going when it's done. Well, that's what Masters do. Masters rise up out of the ocean of divine love, and like a wave, they come and rescue all the little raindrops or the little disciples that are their marked sheep. Each master has his own marked sheep, and he finds you. You don't have to worry. If it's your turn to have a master, he'll find you. And this is how my master found me. It's called The Rascal Story. The Revolutionary Angels of California. It was 1964, and I was just back from a stay in Mexico with no place to live. There was a group of music makers living in an abandoned house on Waterloo Street across from the Queen of Angels Hospital. They wanted me to join them as their house mother. The leader was a 30-year-old concert violinist who seemed to have permission from the owner to live there until the house was torn down to build a parking lot for the hospital. In the master bedroom lived a young couple from Hawaii who mysteriously came and went. Scattered around the other rooms were various young men in their early 20s, guarded by an elderly jazz musician trumpet player. These rascals spent most of their time jamming and trashing for precious articles with which they decorated the house until there was only a path from room to kitchen and bathroom. In the midst of this hurry and scurry, I was often asked advice. If I gave any, they would argue back. So I built a throne for myself and a pillow at my feet to remind them they were asking my advice and I didn't need to hear their arguments. Meanwhile, I was getting my information as I stood on the parapet of Queen of Angels Hospital, looking across the Hollywood freeway to St. Vincent's, where the wisdom to answer these angels was coming from.